Marina's birthday gala was nothing short of a grand spectacle. Relatives and friends from both sides of the family had gathered in full force, and the atmosphere brimmed with anticipation. Standing atop a small stage, Marina delivered a speech so heartfelt that her voice quavered with emotion more than once. Her eyes welled with tears as she spoke, and each time Damon, ever attentive, stepped forward to gently dab them away, offering silent reassurance. No matter how one looked at it, the evening hardly resembled an ordinary birthday party. Rather, it evoked the feel of a wedding reception, with a couple seemingly exchanging vows in place of the usual celebratory speeches. "Isn't today supposed to be your engagement with Damon?" a voice demanded in disbelief. "Then why on earth is he here celebrating your sister's birthday?" At that very moment, my closest friend Bianca burst into my dance studio, her eyes wide as she took in the live stream on my phone and the hotel decor. "Celeste really outdid herself, didn't she? I remember we handpicked these designs together." I had just wrapped up practice and was perfecting my routine in front of the mirror when Bianca's words reached me. Without even turning around, I replied in a measured tone, "The engagement is off." Bianca's face went pale. "What? I don't understand," she stammered. But as she caught a glimpse of the detached expression in my eyes, she swiftly pieced the puzzle together. "It's because of Marina, isn't it?" I sighed and nodded. "Exactly. 3 months ago, Marina returned from her studies overseas. She arrived just in time to catch Damon and me deep in the throes of planning our engagement. I'd chosen the venue, set the date, and coordinated every little detail with utmost care. But then, barely a week ago, Marina mentioned that her birthday was coming up. She wanted nothing less than an extravagant celebration, the first grand reunion she'd have with all her old friends in years, since she hadn't properly celebrated back home for over 6 years. Naturally, my parents were more than happy to help. In fact, they insisted the party be as lavish as possible. The problem was that my own birthday was looming just a week away, and there simply wasn't enough time to set everything up the way I had planned. Marina's pout had been hard to miss. My parents exchanged a thoughtful glance, as if silently acknowledging the time crunch. Then, out of the blue, Marina had an idea. After a moment of hesitation, her eyes lit up. "Why don't we use Celeste's venue?" she suggested, referring to the hotel where the decor and arrangements had already been finalized. At first, my parents hesitated. After all, every aspect of that venue had been meticulously arranged for my engagement with Damon. But Marina, ever the persuasive one, clung to their arms and pleaded, "It's just a birthday party. It won't change anything. Besides, using Celeste's venue saves us so much time and effort." Marina had always been their favorite. Even the slightest sign of discontent from her was enough to send them into a tizzy, and now listening to her speak as if she were genuinely concerned about easing their workload, they felt an overwhelming sense of relief and joy. They hadn't even paused to consider that I had poured months of painstaking effort into planning every detail for what was supposed to be the most important day of my life. Bianca was utterly speechless when I finished recounting everything. "Are you serious?" she finally blurted out. "She hijacked your engagement venue? It's not like you're about to, well, you know." Her voice dripped with indignation as she raged on my behalf. "And what about Damien? Did he just go along with it?" I hesitated, the thought of Damien tugging at my heartstrings, but then I recalled his casual response. Damien simply said, "We can get engaged anytime, but her birthday comes only once a year. She's been away for 5 long years. Can't we at least give her the proper celebration she deserves?" I paused, the question swirling in my mind. Why did it have to fall on the day we planned our engagement? Why did it have to be in the venue I had so lovingly chosen? Countless thoughts and regrets had built up inside me, but the moment I noticed the impatient crease forming on Damien's brow, I was silenced. Damien had always treated Marina differently. He never hesitated to offer her help, whether it was tutoring her after school, accompanying her on weekends, or simply being there whenever she needed someone. I had assumed that despite his generosity toward Marina, he would know exactly where to draw the line. I never imagined that a single request from her would prompt him to agree so readily. I stayed in the studio until the lights finally dimmed, leaving behind a storm of mixed emotions. Yet the night was far from over. By the time I made it to the venue, the celebration was in full swing. Guests mingled throughout the room, with Marina flitting about, champagne glass in hand, chatting and laughing. I recognized several familiar faces, some even from our high school days, but compared to the intimate camaraderie Marina shared with Damien and others, I felt like a mere acquaintance. "Marina, you've become even more beautiful with time," someone remarked. "Oh, stop it, Blake," she teased, her tone light yet sincere. "Really, just look at you and Damien. You two are the perfect match." Blake, always ready with a quip, chimed in. "I heard from several people during your speech that you two are simply made for each other." His words sparked laughter among the guests, and Marina's giggles rang out as she covered her mouth in delight. Damien's smile was softer but no less genuine. In that moment I tried to absorb the scene, a mix of joy and heartbreak swirling within me. I wasn't entirely unhurt, but then a voice called out, "Damien, is Reina here?" The sound jolted me back to reality. I met Damien's gaze. His warm, affectionate look vanished instantly, replaced by surprise and a tinge of irritation. Instinctively, he stepped away from Marina and strode toward me. "You are here?" he asked abruptly, his tone suggesting I wasn't expected at all. I looked at him steadily, noting the flicker of regret in his eyes as he quickly reached for my hand. "I just thought, why didn't you call to pick me up?" he added, his voice softening as if trying to mend a sudden rift. I had never imagined the day would come when Damon would say something so dismissive, as if his care for me didn't matter. "It's nothing," I murmured. "Taking a cab was easier." He chuckled, dismissing my words, but I couldn't help noticing the cold distance in his tone. Before I could gather my thoughts, Marina approached with her usual composure. "You're here after all," she said, her smile unwavering as she gracefully adjusted the hem of her dress, a gown I had once prepared for what was meant to be our engagement celebration. Noticing my curious glance, she beamed and asked, "Do you like my dress, Celeste?" There was a spark of playful provocation in her eyes, mingled with pride. Damon quickly interjected, "Marina's gown wasn't ready in time, so just to be clear, there's no misunderstanding. I won't be needing that dress anymore." I managed a strange smile. "It looks fantastic on you," I offered, though a part of me longed to explain that I hadn't even managed to get you a proper birthday gift. "Consider this my present," I added softly. Marina paused, seemingly taken aback by my tone. Damon, oblivious, even sighed in relief as if a weight had been lifted. "I'll make sure to get you an even better one next time," he promised. I wasn't convinced. In my heart, I resented the way everything had unfolded. "I'm off to see my parents first," I declared, and with that I excused myself. My parents were gathered in the living room, flipping through photos taken earlier in the evening. "These came out so beautifully," my mother gushed, pointing to a group photo featuring Damon, Marina, and them. Marina gazed at the picture with a satisfied smile. "Don't you think Damon and Marina make the perfect pair?" my father mused, though my mother's voice betrayed a hint of wistfulness as she added, "They do look wonderful together, but Damon's with Celeste now. And if Marina hadn't been abroad all these years, would Celeste have had a chance at all?" My mother's wistfulness stung as she recalled how Damon had always been Marina's favorite. I remembered my childhood vividly. My mother had once bought 2 beautiful princess dresses. We should each have one, I'd thought, but Marina had clung to both, crying, "They're both mine. I want them both." I could still picture my mother scooping her up and soothing her with a tender laugh. All right, they're both yours, Marina." It was a small incident then, but it had left a lasting impression. Over the years, my mother had been obsessively careful that Marina never lacked anything, even if it meant sacrificing my own needs. I had spent countless hours perfecting my dance routines, always the top student at the academy, yet my parents' attention rarely fell on me. Marina left me feeling perpetually in her shadow. Later that night, as I prepared to leave the venue, Damien's hand reached out to escort me out. "I'll walk with you," he said, his voice laced with a fleeting tenderness that I wasn't sure I could trust anymore. Just then Marina's voice rang out again. "You're leaving, but the cake hasn't even been cut yet," she chided, disappointment clear in her tone. "You ordered this cake yourself. Why don't you stay and cut it with me?" Damien's grip on my hand stiffened, but I managed to excuse myself. "No thanks, I'm watching my figure." Deep down, I knew exactly what Damien truly wanted. I offered a weak excuse about being exhausted from rehearsals and slipped away into the cool night air. Glancing back, I saw a throng of guests gathered around the cake table on the lawn. There, Damien and Marina stood side by side, slicing the enormous cake amid a sea of smiling faces. The scene was bittersweet, familiar yet alien to me. I recalled my mother's words earlier that evening. If Marina hadn't returned from abroad, there might have been no space for me or Damien in her carefully curated world. I loved Damien, but it seemed my mother had always preferred Damien's adoration for Marina. I remembered my childhood vividly. My mother's constant worry that Marina wouldn't be taken care of led her to delay my schooling by a year. "You have to take good care of your sister, understand?" she would repeat from kindergarten through high school. Then, when Damien came into the picture, everything changed. "I'll leave Marina in your capable hands," she'd said, as if Damien were the perfect prize to secure for Marina. After high school, upon learning which university Damien had applied to, she even altered both our applications, mine so that I could remain close to Marina, and Marina's to ensure she'd be with Damien. Yet fate had its own plans, and while Marina eventually went overseas for her studies, I was left behind, feeling increasingly like the replacement rather than the equal. It wasn't long before Damien returned home in the middle of the night. I was still awake, poring over research papers on my tablet when he appeared at the door. "You're back," he said with a hint of surprise. I switched off the screen and looked up. Damien's eyes held a softness for just a moment before he added, "Go take a shower first and try to keep it quiet. I'm going to sleep soon." After his shower, Damien slipped into bed under a thick warm blanket, his arm wrapped around my waist as he murmured softly, his voice laden with vulnerability, "Celeste, please don't take tonight too hard." I asked calmly, "What do you mean? Are you upset about the engagement party being turned into Marina's birthday celebration? Or about Marina wearing what was supposed to be my engagement dress? Or is it about the way our parents spoke earlier?" Damien opened his mouth as if to reply but then hesitated. Perhaps he sensed the unusual calm in my tone. In the past, if I had protested or even cried, he would have known exactly what to do. But now, I simply accepted everything with a numb indifference, a resignation that this was what he desired, even if it left him feeling defeated and uneasy. "I know you're upset," Celeste Damon finally said, his arms tightening around me as if trying to offer some consolation. "I promise I'll make it up to you with an even grander wedding in the future." His words were met with silence on my end, yet I couldn't help but wonder if that future was even possible. The following day, gossip swirled around the academy as whispers of what had transpired reached those who knew only fragments of the truth. Damien began sending flowers to the academy, and while many teased him, oblivious to the real story, only Bianca remained unimpressed. In fact, she appeared even angrier at Damon than I was, a reaction that oddly enough managed to amuse me. Not long after, the assistant to the dean approached with some paperwork. Bianca's eyes narrowed as she asked, "What's this?" I explained, "It's an application form for the Academy's overseas study program." I told the dean I wanted to apply. Bianca nearly snatched the form from my hands. "A 3-year program?" she exclaimed. "Does Damon know?" I shrugged. He would find out soon enough. I had never intended to hide my plans for further studies from him, and now that the application was in my hands, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to finally discuss it. Without delay, I drove straight to Damon's company. The receptionist, who knew me well, allowed me access to the executive elevator without question. As soon as I stepped out, I heard Marina's light voice. "Wow, the view from here is amazing." Leaning casually against the floor-to-ceiling windows in Damon's office, Marina was marveling at the panoramic vista of the city's central district. Damon stood behind her, his smile indulgent and brimming with affection. "Are you hiring?" "Because I'm capable of anything," Marina joked, eliciting a playful chuckle from Damon. Their banter was so effortless that it seemed as though they were the only two people in the room. Even the secretary couldn't help but roll her eyes at their antics. Then, as if on cue, she spotted me. "Miss Celeste," she announced, and both Damon and Marina's smiles faltered for a moment. Marina stepped past Damon and said with a casual air, "You're here." I was getting bored today, so Damon gave me a tour of his office. Before I could interject, Damon came over and gently took my hand. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" he asked, a hint of reproach in his tone. "Sorry," I replied softly. I'll text you next time. He frowned slightly, clearly mulling over something unsaid when Marina interjected abruptly. I'm feeling a bit hungry, she declared, instantly shifting the mood. Damon glanced over at me. Have you eaten yet? He asked. Let's grab something together, he suggested, and without waiting, Damon drove us out of the underground parking garage. As the car slowed to a stop, Marina reached for the passenger door with a teasing smile. Oh, Celeste, you go first. It's just my habit, she said playfully, sticking out her tongue. Throughout the meal, Marina chatted incessantly, mostly directing her attention at Damon. He listened attentively, sometimes even helping himself to place a piece of food on my plate. I want some too, I murmured. But Marina then remarked, you treat Celeste so well. I wish I could find a boyfriend as amazing as you. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Damon only chuckled, dismissing it with a casual, just eat your food. Halfway through the meal, I hesitantly asked Damon, are you free this afternoon? I really need to talk to you. Damon turned to me, then recalled with a slight grimace, I have a meeting later today. All right then, let's talk this evening, I suggested. That evening, however, Damon informed me that he had to leave on a business trip that would last an entire week, and to my dismay, he would be taking Marina with him. Damon booked an evening flight, and by the time they landed, it was already past 11 p.m. Later, before sleep could claim me, I found myself scrolling through Marina's Instagram. Her first post from the trip featured a photo taken from a hotel's floor-to-ceiling window, the location tag unmistakably marking the city Damon had mentioned. In the reflective glass, I could just make out two silhouettes standing together. Even my mother had liked the post, leaving a comment that read, "Good luck, sweetheart." A surge of anger shot through me, and without delay I called Damon. He answered hesitantly, "Celeste," a voice that even through the phone oozed a sickly sweetness reminiscent of Marina's charm. "Where's Damon?" I demanded. "He's in the shower. Do you need me to tell him something?" The voice replied in a light, almost innocent tone, but to me, it was the spark of an impending explosion. I forced myself to remain calm. "No, it's fine. Just tell him I called. Why are you being so defensive?" Marina's voice, layered with mock indignation, suddenly came through on the line. "Tell him to call me back." I snapped, my own voice rising in anger. For a brief charged moment after a long pause, Damon finally answered, "What's wrong? Did you take Marina on your trip?" A brief silence followed before he explained that Marina had insisted on joining him because she claimed to want to see somewhere special. A feeble excuse that only added to my growing resentment. My temples ached with each passing moment as Damon, sensing my silence, inquired in a panicked tone, "Celeste, if I asked you to send Marina back right now, would you do it?" I couldn't let his question go unanswered. "I don't want you, Marina," I said firmly. Before I could finish, Damon's voice suddenly rose in alarm. I heard him set his phone down, followed by the sounds of hurried footsteps and rustling. Marina's soft, pitiful voice floated through the line. "I'm just going to explore on my own." Damon's tone grew louder as he called after her. "She's unfamiliar with this place and it's late. I need to find her first. We'll talk later." The call ended abruptly, and I never received a response. Another word from Damon that night. Yet Marina's Instagram soon lit up with a series of updates. 5 different posts, each from a new location, with Damon's figure appearing in the background or reflected in the glass of every picture. I couldn't help but reflect on my own relationship with Damon. After years of dating, our adventures had always been confined to the same familiar spots, and here he was whisking Marina away to new and exciting places. The contrast between our routine and his newfound exuberance with Marina was stark and painfully clear. Damon was scheduled to return in a week, but he came back on the 10th day. By that time, my application for the overseas study program had been approved, and I was set to depart in just 2 weeks. I had already packed most of my belongings, preparing for the next chapter of my academic life. As I dragged my suitcase toward the door one final time, I caught sight of Damon and Marina stepping out of his car, laughing together as if they had just shared the best of times. Their smiles lingered as they basked in the afterglow of their trip. When Damon's eyes met mine, his joyful expression vanished, replaced by an icy, hurried look. "Where are you off to?" he asked sharply. "I'm moving into my dorm. I need to sort out my last preparations before leaving the country, I replied. Before I could add another word, Marina interjected. Are you still upset? Is that why you're leaving? Her voice was laced with innocent curiosity, her brows raised as if in genuine concern. Damon's gaze darkened as he considered her words. You never told me you were coming back today, he said, his tone suddenly colder than before. I met his eyes steadily, confused by the abrupt change. You never mentioned it, I replied softly. Damon's face stiffened as if the memory of our last conversation, a conversation that had ended with him chasing after Marina, had suddenly resurfaced. He looked uneasy and embarrassed, yet ultimately dismissed the topic with a sullen, Celeste, stop making a fuss. Let's just go home and talk later. I brushed aside his hand, reaching for my suitcase, replying, I'm not making a fuss. I've got too much to do at school. His eyes bore into me, silent and accusatory. Days passed, and once everything at school was settled, Bianca asked with hesitant concern, Have you told Damon you're going abroad? That's when it struck me. I had completely forgotten to mention it. I hurried home, but Damon wasn't there. I began packing up my things when he finally returned. Seeing me, he looked momentarily surprised before a relaxed smile took over his face. I was about to speak when his expression turned cold again, and without a word, he disappeared into his study. Is he sulking? I mused to myself, amused at the irony of it. The next morning, I intercepted Damon before he left for work. I need to talk to you. Can you spare 20 minutes? I asked. He pressed his lips together, checking his watch. I've got something to tell you too, he admitted. I'll pick you up after work tonight. I agreed. I waited silently until the evening. By then I had already packed most of my things at home. During a brief break, I scrolled through Instagram and came across a post from Marina at a jewelry store. A dazzling diamond ring adorning her hand. Not only had my mother liked the post, but Damon had as well. I couldn't help but feel a sting of jealousy. That very evening, Damon returned and suggested we go out for dinner. By the way, he said as I was changing into the dress I had once given him for his birthday, that dress looks stunning on you. I couldn't help but wonder aloud. Does it really have to be this ceremonial? Although puzzled, I rationalized that after years of our tumultuous relationship, perhaps we deserved a proper closure. I changed into the dress and caught a glimpse of Damon's reflection in the mirror. His eyes warm and full of affection, the soft lighting making them shimmer as if ignited by hidden emotions. You look beautiful, he murmured, wrapping his arms around me from behind. His head dipped as he whispered near my ear, There's just something off about you today. Yet there was still time to unravel the mystery. Instead of driving straight to the restaurant, Damon took me on a nostalgic tour of the university campus. Do you remember our first meeting here after the entrance exams? He recalled, gesturing toward a cherry blossom tree along a quiet pathway. It wasn't even blossom season, but the tree was lush with life. He recounted how back then he had asked why I was alone, too embarrassed to admit that my parents had accompanied Marina for her retake exams. Later that day, Damon even helped me lug my luggage to the dormitory, and I had treated him to a modest meal afterward. Though our departments were at opposite ends of the campus, fate always seemed to ensure our paths crossed at mealtimes. No one could fault Damon. He was gentle, admirable, and had an air of unattainable perfection. Yet deep in my heart, I knew he never truly belonged to me. Every encounter with him evoked both joy and sorrow. It was after Marina left for her studies abroad that Damon finally asked me, almost unexpectedly, Would you be my girlfriend? I had allowed myself to follow that fragile hope, even though it eventually crumbled under the weight of reality. Today, as Damon rambled through campus recounting memories, I listened with a polite detachment. He led me through the campus until we reached the entrance of my department. I used to wait here for you after class, he said softly. I had expected him to continue reminiscing, but he suddenly fell silent. Later, Damon finally took me to dinner. His mood had visibly lightened as a violinist performed beside our table. The candlelight flickered, rendering his face tender and almost ethereal. Yet as soon as I stepped into the restaurant, I sensed something amiss. The decor exuded an air of luxury and carefully orchestrated surprise. Midway through the violin performance, several waiters marched in, pushing a massive bouquet of flowers. Soon, some of Damon's friends surrounded our table amid cheers, party poppers bursting and colorful streamers raining down. At one point, Damon knelt before me on one knee. "Celeste, will you marry me?" he declared. I stared in shock, utterly unprepared for such a spectacle. Laughter and jibes rippled through the crowd. "She didn't see that coming, did she?" someone joked as Damon's friends egged him on. He attempted to slip the ring onto my finger, but I abruptly pulled my hand away. A sudden silence fell over the room. "What is going on?" murmured one of the onlookers. "Has Celeste always wanted to marry Damon?" The murmurs grew louder. Was I rejecting him? Damon's smile stiffened instantly. "Celeste," he managed, his voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. I realized then that Damon had been acting strangely these past few days because he was orchestrating this very proposal, hoping to announce something he had held back all along. I stood up abruptly and commanded everyone, "Please leave. I need to speak with you, Damon." In that hushed moment, Damon's face was a portrait of helplessness and unease. I had already applied for an overseas study program at the academy, and now I finally found the courage to reveal it. Damon's eyes widened momentarily. "Celeste, are you breaking up with me because of this?" he asked in a near whisper. "It's not that simple," I replied, my voice trembling yet resolute. 3 years isn't that long for a long-distance relationship, Damon. I can't do this." I looked him straight in the eye, the weight of all our shared history and my own shattered dreams heavy in my tone. "We're done," I declared, my words slicing through the tense silence. It wasn't a sudden decision. Since our engagement plans had been derailed, obstacles had continually appeared, each one a sign that what we once hoped for was never truly meant to be. I recalled my mother's voice from earlier that night, reminding me how, as a child, she had always prioritized Marina above all else. "You were never enough," I thought bitterly, realizing that my own life had been overshadowed time and again by Marina's presence. When Marina's call came that night, she said, "Celeste, I'm moving the last box out of Damon's house. Mom wants you to come home for dinner, and don't forget to bring Damon." I hesitated only a moment before hanging up. When I arrived home, I rang the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal Marina's radiant smile, but as soon as she saw I was alone, her expression faltered. "Where's Damon?" she asked, pouting and rolling her eyes before turning back inside, calling out, "Celeste, come on in." My mother sat in the living room, her eyes bright with cheerful chatter alongside Marina. Yet, as they laughed together, I felt the painful sting of invisibility. My mother asked softly, "Celeste, did you forget? I left some photos at Damon's place. Could you ask him to bring them back?" Marina's eyes sparkled mischievously as she added, "Why don't you ask him yourself?" I replied coolly, "It's just a trivial matter under our mother's disapproval." Proving glance, I muttered, "Damien and I have broken up. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come home today." A heavy silence settled over the room. For a brief moment, a flicker of satisfaction danced in Marina's eyes while our mother looked visibly awkward, unsure how to respond. After what felt like an eternity, our mother finally asked in a strained tone, "Why did you break up?" There was no regret in her voice, only a cold sincerity that cut me to the bone. "Isn't this what you wanted?" I countered sharply. "If I hadn't ended things with him, how else would you have let Marina take my place?" My mother's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "What are you talking about? How can you say that?" she snapped. That night, the argument between my mother and me was the fiercest we had had in over 20 years. She spat out accusations. "You were never as thoughtful as Marina. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have the life you do now. You can't even keep your own boyfriend." Her words stung with the bitter truth of parental favoritism. I fought back with every ounce of hurt. Maybe I'll never be as perfect as Marina, but at least I deserve better than to be cast aside. My mother's face hardened, and in that moment, I realized that our once harmonious family was now fragmented beyond repair. After I gathered my belongings, I announced in a steady voice, "I'm leaving the country. Even after my studies end, I don't plan to come back." I recalled the day Marina returned from her years abroad, her tears, our parents' tearful embrace as they said, "We missed you so much." I remembered how every holiday and special occasion, I'd been the one left behind. My parents had always lavished praise on Marina with just one phone call while I was overlooked time and again. As I prepared to depart, I could no longer ignore the truth. I had been born not to be cherished for who I was, but to fill the void that Marina's absence created. Before I could leave, Marina's voice broke through the tension. "Celeste," she said softly, her eyes glimmering with mischief under the warm light. "Remember to ask Damien for my photos." I responded coolly, "Ask him yourself." Our mother, the peacemaker, interjected with a quiet scold. "It's only a small thing. Just tell him, please." In that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. Damien and I broke up. "If not for that, I wouldn't have come home today," I stated bluntly. The room fell into an uneasy silence. A flicker of satisfaction passed over Marina's face while Mom's expression turned uncertain, caught between shock and resignation. After a long, painful pause, Mom finally managed to ask, "Celeste, why did you break up with him?" Her voice carried no pity, only a raw honesty that stung me deeply. "Because, Mom," I said slowly, "if I hadn't ended it, you'd have always chosen Marina over me. You made it clear time and again that Marina deserved everything, even if it meant sidelining me." My mother's face contorted in anger and disbelief. "What are you saying? You're twisting everything around," she spat. "As good as Marina in my eyes, how can you even think you deserve more?" I forced myself to hold back the tears as I replied evenly, "Then from now on, I'm done pretending I never existed as your daughter." As I spoke these words, my mother's voice rose in panic. "Where are you going?" she cried. "I'm leaving the country," I said calmly. "After my studies are finished, I won't return." I recalled how, as a child, Marina's return from abroad had been met with such exuberance by my parents. How one phone call from her could make them shower her with praise. In contrast, my presence had always been secondary. I stepped outside, and as I walked away, I saw Marina's face briefly bright and carefree while my mother's eyes filled with regret and shock. I could hear Marina's laughter echoing from inside while behind me. The memory of every slight and every preferential moment with Marina haunted me. A few days later, as I was about to leave, Bianca came by to see me off, her eyes red with reluctance. "Take care of yourself out there," she whispered. "And don't forget about me." I promised softly, "I won't." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a sleek black car parked by the roadside. The license plate was all too familiar. Bianca's hostility toward Damon was evident when he emerged from the car and walked toward me. I watched as his once bright eyes now seemed haggard, dark circles under them a testament to sleepless nights and troubled thoughts. He stopped right in front of me. "What time is your flight?" he asked in a voice that barely masked his inner turmoil. 2 in the afternoon, I replied. "I'll take you to the academy bus," he offered, blinking back tears that betrayed his stoic facade. After a long pause, he murmured, "Celeste, I'm sorry." Those words, spoken so softly yet with so much weight, echoed the apologies he had repeated countless times over the past few days. That night, as Damon and I lay in our separate beds, he finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you bring up breaking up?" His voice was tentative, laden with multiple questions I'd been too afraid to voice. After a moment of silence, I asked the question that had haunted me for so long. "Damon, did you ever get together with me because of Marina? Because after Marina returned, your behavior changed completely." His face drained of color. For a long moment, he was speechless, a silence louder than any words could be. Then, with an anguished sigh, he muttered, "I'm sorry, I truly am." But his apology was drowned out by the sting of the final irrevocable truth. I had always believed that I was open and honest in our relationship, that everything was shared between us, but Damon's actions had gradually revealed his true loyalties. I realized with piercing clarity that I had been nothing more than Marina's stand-in, and so I broke it off. Shortly after, I left for my studies abroad. The transition was smoother than expected, the language barrier soon dissolved, and my new companions were kind and welcoming. I changed all my contact information in China, keeping only Bianca's number even from afar. I still heard snippets about Damon, whispers that he continued to post proposals and declarations on social media, much to the amusement of those around him. Friends speculated wildly about his behavior, with some calling him a scoundrel who merely regretted his actions. One insider even revealed that Damon's behavior wasn't some grand romantic gesture at all. It was simply the act of a man trying to justify his own mistakes. As the days turned into weeks, the online chatter grew more vicious. Marina's family became the target of relentless harassment, forcing them to rarely leave their home. Marina herself had once wanted to ask Damon for help after a terrible car accident, a calamity that had taken place when Marina and Damon were arguing during a drive. In that tragic incident, one person had lost their life, and Marina was gravely injured while Damon suffered a broken leg. For 3 long months, I had been unable to visit them until a tearful call from home forced me to confront the painful truth. "Celeste, can you come back?" my mother pleaded over the phone. I remained silent for a moment before replying, "I'm not coming back." Her voice cracked as she begged for support, but I simply hung up, closing the door on that chapter of my life. And so that was the end of it. A story of shattered engagements, manipulated loyalties, and a family divided by favoritism. I had once dreamed of a future with Damon, a future filled with promise and shared dreams, but that future was now lost. The truth had finally emerged. I was never truly cherished in a world where Marina always came first. I was left to fade into the background. Looking back, I recall how my childhood had been marred by constant comparisons. My mother had always made it clear that Marina deserved the best of everything. Even the dance classes I had excelled in were originally meant for her. I had spent years perfecting my art, yet not once had my parents come to one of my performances. Their hearts belonged solely to Marina, leaving me to wonder why I wasn't loved in the same way. When news of our breakup with Damon spread, his friends tried to talk me out of it, but I silenced them with a single determined sentence. "If you think this is nothing, I can send our entire chat record to your friends." Their laughter died down immediately. It seemed that people only cared when the knife was pointed directly at them. 2 days later, the moment of my departure finally arrived. Bianca saw me off with tear-streaked eyes, whispering, "Take care of yourself out there, Celeste, and don't ever forget me." I promised softly, "I won't." As I stepped away, I noticed that same sleek black car once more parked by the roadside. Damon emerged from it, his tired eyes meeting mine one last time. He asked softly, "What time is your flight?" I replied, 2 in the afternoon, and he offered, "I'll drive you. There's a bus arranged by the academy." His eyes trembled as he added, "Celeste, I'm sorry." In that final moment, I couldn't help but wonder if Damon's regret was genuine, or if it was just another excuse for what had always been inevitable. With every step away from that life I left behind, the lingering memories of a love that had never truly been mine remained. As the road stretched out before me, I realized that sometimes the only way to find your own worth is to walk away from the shadows of someone else's favoritism.